Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Patrick Clayton. I'm the Policy Officer with the Children's Law Centre. I'd like to thank Bruno for the invitation to speak with you all this afternoon around involving children and young people in the process of reporting to the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child. I'll try and keep this brief and I'll try and keep it as eloquent as I can. I intended to work on it yesterday afternoon, but after 3 p.m. I was an emotional wreck. So if it does get a bit incoherent at points, please forgive me. But I've led for the Children's Law Centre for the last 18 months or so in terms of reporting to the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child generally, alongside my colleague Orla Minogue from Save the Children. My colleagues Emma Campbell and Deirdre McMahon have worked quite specifically on the issue of involving children and young people. Unfortunately, they can't be here today, but I'll try and put a bit of flesh on the bones in terms of how we've taken that process forward. It's actually a very timely moment for us to reflect on the work we've done, because we just had the pre-sessional hearing with the Committee on the Rights of the Child less than 2 weeks ago. And young people from Northern Ireland travelled to Geneva as part of that process, and I'll speak a little bit more about that later on. Before I actually get into the substance of how we involve children and young people in the reporting process, I'm very, very briefly going to explain the reporting process to you. Basically, the NGO reporting process in Northern Ireland, including the involvement of children and young people, is taken forward as a partnership approach between the Children's Law Centre and Save the Children. And this is the third occasion that the Children's Law Centre and Save the Children have worked in partnership on this process. And we compile a NGO alternative report for Northern Ireland. We're very fortunate that for this reporting process we're also supported in our task by the Centre for Children's Rights here at Queen's. It's not a report that we compile purely for the Children's Law Centre or purely for Save the Children. It's a report that we try and compile on behalf of the whole children's sector in Northern Ireland, and really our aim is to try and bring about as much positive change for children and young people as we can in the enjoyment of their rights. So we try and engage in a very inclusive process, not only with other NGOs and with individuals who have an interest in children's rights, but also with children and young people themselves, and we try and reflect their views as broadly as we can in reporting to the Committee on the Rights of the Child. I'm not going to get into too much detail on how we did the NGO alternative report, which was separate to the young people's report that we submitted to the Committee on the Rights of the Child, but I will take the opportunity to thank everyone who contributed to that report, and I know some people are here today who did contribute to the report. It was a very collaborative process, and we were very pleased with the input there was. Just to give people a bit of an insight into the obligations around reporting, UK government signed the CRC in 1989, it ratified the convention in 1991, and I mean our view really is that through ratifying the CRC, the government's committed to giving effect to it, and so the standards contained in the CRC should be reflected in all laws and policies emanating from our Assembly as one of the devolved regions of the UK government. In terms of the reporting and examination process, through signing and ratifying the CRC, the UK government is obliged to report on its compliance with its obligations under the Convention to the Committee on the Rights of the Child, which is a body of independent experts that monitors implementation of the CRC. And they do that through periodic reporting and presenting for oral examination to the committee. Now, the UK government report for this examination was submitted in May of 2014. That was coordinated by the Department of Education in London. It's a report for the 4 jurisdictions of the UK. The Northern Ireland input was coordinated by OFM, DFM here. Following the examination process, the committee issues concluding observations and recommendations in relation to the implementation of the CRC in the UK. The obligation on the state parties to actually give effect to them, and then there's a cyclical process, and we begin again for further examination and looking at the issue once more. Prior to the examination, and I've referred to the pre-sessional hearing, the committee holds a pre-sessional hearing. That provides it with an opportunity to hear from NGOs, to hear from the children's commissioners from throughout the UK, and to hear from children and young people themselves, and actually, as well as the IHRI, sorry Colin, I forgot you there for a moment, but to examine disparities between the NGO reports, between the reports that are submitted by others, and between what the government is saying in the state party report. And that allows it really to focus on issues that it wants to raise at the examination phase with the government in question. Now, for the current examination process, CLC and Save the Children developed, as I said, an NGO alternative report, but we also developed, and this was led by Youth at CLC, who are the Children's Law Centre's Youth Advisory Panel, a Northern Ireland Young People's report to the committee, and that was submitted in June of this year. And that's the process that I'm going to comment on in a little more detail. Really the overall aim in taking forward both reporting processes, because both processes were complementary to one another, really our aim was, as I've said, to try and bring about positive change for children and young people in terms of the implementation of their rights, to work with others and to work with duty bearers and governments, so ministers, MLAs, public officials, to try and affect that kind of change. But for children and young people specifically, I've put what the aim of youth participation in the reporting process was up on the slide, and it really is as it says. It was about trying to get their voices into a reporting process, to try and influence the examination of the UK government, to try and influence the recommendations and observations that were subsequently made by the Committee on the Rights of the Child. Because obviously participation, Laura reflected on it earlier today, participation is one of the general principles of the CRC. It's a major part of the CRC, and it was something that we felt we needed to really reflect within our own reporting processes. Both the Young People's Report and the NGO Alternative Report are both available on the Children's Law Centre's website. They really should be read in conjunction with one another. They really mutually illustrate issues that affect children and young people and the implementation of children's rights in Northern Ireland, and I'd obviously encourage people to take a look at them, and a link to our website is included at the end of the slides. Just thinking about how we took forward the Young People's Report specifically, as I said, what we wanted here was a separate but complementary approach, and what Youth at CLC wanted was really to work on this process themselves as well. Really, at the beginning, the youth group was quite keen to the idea of presenting a report to the committee in a medium of their choice. Ultimately, what we did was we did submit a paper copy of the report, but there also was a DVD produced that summarises the report. It's about 7 minutes long, and that was a medium that they thought would be useful to actually highlight some of the key findings within the Young People's Report, and even in terms of accessibility, it was something that could be a useful resource going forward. Something we were keen to do was to make sure that the report didn't just reflect the views of Youth at CLC. We wanted it to reflect the views of a much broader range of children and young people in Northern Ireland. And so one of the things we did to try and take forward that process was we developed a young people's survey. So prior to the beginning of wider engagement with children and young people, we had a 3-day residential in Corrymeela with 10 Youth at CLC members who are aged 15 to 17. And the aim of this was to try and design and really write an online survey that would assist us in consulting with a wide range of children and young people. And we were very much supported by the Centre for Children's Rights in that, and particularly Dr. Karen Orr and Dr. Chelsea Marshall. After that residential, Karen Orr then worked with Youth at CLC during the summer of 2014 to develop the survey. And the themes of the survey were those that were identified by Youth at CLC as generic children's rights issues that impacted on all children and young people, and were again based on the general principles of the CRC. So for example, the survey covered areas around the right of the child not to be discriminated against, and we've heard an awful lot about non-discrimination today. Issues around how children felt their right to participate and issues affecting them was being upheld in Northern Ireland, both in the community, at home, in schools, in political life in Northern Ireland. We looked at issues around children and young people's general knowledge of their rights, and issues around how children felt that their right to life, survival and development was being upheld. And in that regard, there was a particular focus on mental health. And that was something that the young people within Youth at CLC thought was an area that needed more examination. Certainly from my perspective, thinking forward to the NGO Alternative Report, I also thought that would be a very useful thing for the young people to look into around updating our understanding of how children and young people perceive their mental and emotional health in Northern Ireland. The survey was designed to cover all areas of Northern Ireland and to gather the views of young people from a range of backgrounds. But we were also very conscious that the survey wasn't necessarily going to be the best way to gather information on all young people, that there would be particular groups of young people that we might need additional information on, or to supplement the data we collected through the survey, or who we needed to consult with in a different way. And so we also had a series of young people's research workshops and consultation workshops. I'll give you some examples of some of the groups of young people we consulted with. We consulted with minority ethnic young people. We consulted with young people who were not in education, employment and training. We consulted with young people who had experience of the criminal justice system. I was able, alongside Dr. Dina Hayden from Queen's, to consult specifically with young people in secure care at the Lakewood Centre in Bangor, with children and young people from the Roma community in Northern Ireland. And that's actually an ongoing piece of work, and it's something we're hoping to publish separately in the near future, so please watch this space on that one. But overall, around 900 young people participated in the consultation for the Young People's Report. That obviously informed the NGO Alternative Report as well. The vast majority of those young people participated through the survey and also through the research workshops that I've mentioned. We were also mindful, and I think it's appropriate given this is an ARK event to mention this, we were also mindful that an awful lot of work has been done over the last couple of years in Northern Ireland to survey the views of young people, and we drew on that work as well, so particularly ARK's YLT and KLT surveys, and that was very, very useful information to have also. So I'll just maybe give you an insight into what happened after we submitted the reports then. After the report was submitted, the next phase was to prepare for the pre-sessional hearing. The pre-sessional hearing was on the 7th of October past. As I've talked about what the purpose of the pre-sessional hearing is, and really in our minds we thought it was about, as I said in terms of the aims of what the young people wanted to get out of the process, really in our minds we thought it was about assisting the committee in that sort of first stage of developing its eventual concluding observations, developing its list of issues, highlighting the things it might want to ask the UK government about when it examines the UK government next summer. In order to prepare young people for that process and to actually travel to Geneva and meet with the committee members, I've mentioned the production of the DVD, so that production was undertaken during the summer, and the DVD is called Our Lives and Our Words, which is also the title of the young people's report. That was shown to the committee in a separate children's meeting that we had scheduled with the committee over the summer. So that was separate from the overall NGO meeting that took place, and I think that was very, very useful in that the committee had a separate opportunity to meet the young people and hear directly from them. I wasn't involved in that meeting as someone who was representing the NGOs, and I think that's actually very, very useful in a sense to have that separate meeting for the young people themselves. So we had a series of workshops with the young people to develop the DVD and to prepare them for going to Geneva. There also was a visit by a task force from the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, which took place at the start of September. So our young people and young people from Nicky's youth panel, as well as young people from other organisations, had the opportunity to meet with UN committee members when they visited Northern Ireland on the 4th of September. And that gave them an opportunity to reflect some of the key messages that were coming from the Northern Ireland young people's report, and also maybe to make them feel comfortable in terms of engaging with the committee members eventually at the pre-sessional. Tight to time, okay. I'll try and keep this brief. So just to say as well that when the task force was here, they also had the opportunity to meet with other groups of young people who wouldn't be travelling to Geneva. So they visited the Lakewood Centre, for example. They met with young people from the Roma community. And I think that definitely had an impact when we were at the pre-sessional, and that was reflected in the level of interest there was in Northern Ireland and in some of the questions that the committee members were asking during the pre-sessional and asking the young people during their meeting. We then had some further workshops with young people to prepare them for Geneva, and then I'll just skip on to actually talk about the pre-sessional itself. There was, as I say, a separate children's meeting at the pre-sessional, which was on the 7th of October. There were 7 young people from Northern Ireland who travelled, both from Youth at CLC and from other organisations such as Include Youth, and they presented the DVD. They had the opportunity to present a summary report to the committee as well, and then they actually got into discussion with the committee members. So they had the opportunity to ask the committee members questions. They were asked questions by the committee members, and there was a really good Q&A session as I understand it. At the pre-sessional hearing itself for the NGOs and for IHRIs and children's commissioners, there was also the opportunity for the young people at the end of that session to participate again, and I think they found it to be very, very beneficial. I think they found it to be a positive experience, and I think overall it has had a positive impact, although obviously we'll have to see the list of issues when they're released by the committee and ultimately the concluding observations which are made. In terms of our next steps, I've gone on to my last slide. In terms of our next steps, you'll be glad to know. In terms of our next steps, what we're going to be doing now is trying to feed back to all the young people who contributed to the development of the young people's report. We're thinking about having some sort of young people's conference where young people could actually attend and meet with government officials, meet with duty bearers in relation to children's rights, and actually hold them to account around the implementation of the CRC directly. And then obviously post-examination, as certainly I will be and colleagues will be doing, young people will be using the including observations, taking forward campaigning around certain issues they're passionate about and they want to highlight in terms of the implementation of children's rights. So thank you for your attention, and obviously I'll take any questions you have at the end of the session. Thank you.